Hello, everyone. We're here today to talk to you about typography and food. My name is Krista Reeder. I am a design director at Gensler in Seattle.
Yeah, and I'm Ryan Collier. I'm a graphic designer, also at Gensler in Seattle.
So the name of our talk today is called Type Feast, and we're excited to share a menu with you. We're going to start with the amuse-bouche, which we will share a little bit about ourselves, our background, and our perspective on typography and food. Then we'll roll into the main course where we will share three projects that are all based around food as well. And we'll end with a little minardis, which means tiny dessert. And we'll show you where we're thinking about taking Type Feast next.
Yeah, so bon appetit. The amuse-bouche, as Krista mentioned, is just a little intro. Krista and I are both experiential graphic designers, and essentially what that means is we're telling stories through place. And our tools really are typography, color, and illustration. And our work really revolves around that idea of just creating narratives and being able to express a story within a space and a place. You can see our work, there's a range of scales and a range of colors and styles, but typography really is that thread that moves throughout all the projects and kind of unifies everything.
Yeah. So when Ryan and I first met, we discovered that we both shared this love of food, not just cooking it and eating it, but also it was a driving inspiration behind our work through color and texture and flavor. So these are a few of our photographs of food. And you can see that color and texture showcased in all of these, that being a thread with our eye for visual communication.
Yeah, and just to clarify, Krista is a super talented home chef, and not a chef, right?
A cook,
A
yeah.
cook. Okay. Um, I love to eat the food, so whatever that makes me. But we thought that our shared love of cooking and eating and just food in general was a great way to think about cooking techniques and how those relate to our design processes, especially how it relates to typography. So we've set up today's presentation to revolve around three kind of techniques. And the first is thinking about how you balance flavor. So that's really about how you pair and balance a type group. And then the second is thinking about recipe riffing. So how you augment an existing recipe, and that could be augmenting an existing typeface. And the third is cooking from scratch. So you creating custom typography for a project.
All right, let's eat. So, main course, first up, as Ryan mentioned, is about balancing flavor, which is the equivalent of pairing typography and curating typefaces. And the story is about the first Whole Foods market in Brooklyn in the neighborhood of Gowanus. So, Gowanus is a very industrial neighborhood. So, this is some of the inspiration for the project. You can see kind of some of the older brick buildings in the neighborhood with these awesome ghosted signs. To the right, we have old fish market that used to be in the neighborhood. Our team was really inspired by the character of this typography. And then in the middle, you have a modern day butcher shop in Brooklyn. And you can see in this photograph, and if you've visited Brooklyn, you'll know that a lot of the graphic design is inspired by the history of New York. So you can see how those things correlate. So when we started to think about the identity for this new Whole Foods, we started to look at nostalgic typefaces. At that time, Brothers from Emigre, right? That awesome typeface that felt very nostalgic but modern. Here we have Keepsake, experimenting with Gowanus is a beautiful G with that typeface, and then experimenting with something that's completely custom, right? That felt very industrial as well. So this is where we ended up. As you can see, the name was changed from Gowanus to Third and Third, which is the intersection that the store is at. But furthermore, you can see the whole type family here and how it holds together as a family and feels like a single voice, but is flexible and unique enough for each of these departments to feel like their own venue.
Yeah, you can see how that identity gets adapted into the space. So that Third and Third logo starts to show up as a mural, and you can see the other Gowanus kind of accoutrement start to take a shape within the space as well. Also, just thinking about scales again, the logo gets adapted down into a smaller scale. There's obviously an apron on the right that's kind of juxtaposed between that larger scale mural on the left photograph as well.
Yeah, so once you kind of pass the entry threshold here and start to get into each of those departments, this is the meat department, utilizing oxide here in Idlewild to kind of give that sense of kind of industrial Brooklyn, but also inspired by some of those ghosted signs on the brick to make this meat venue feel like it has its own identity. And then you would move into something like the fish market and have something that's a little more faceted. Here we have Brothers as a illuminated can letter that gives you a different feeling as you cross into this department, but it still feels like you're in the same place. And then here on the left, we have my personal favorite piece to design in a grocery store, the light hat or the checkout light. It's this often overlooked piece in the store, and it's a lot of fun to do something special with it. So you can see the form here, also inspired by that nostalgia of the neighborhood, and then the typeface on it as well.
That's my new favorite term. Just little light hat.
Light hats, so cute. And next we have evolving from there, riffing on a recipe, which Ryan mentioned in the intro, is about taking an existing typeface and modifying it to be appropriate for the project. So this is about PK Market, which is a grocery in South Korea. And here we have just a few photographs for some context and background in the project. The company that came to us already had a pre-existing brand of food, of packaged foods and prepared foods that was called Peacock Food Collection. And it was currently just as an aisle in their other grocery stores, a specialty aisle. And they had started this Peacock Kitchen as a way to start testing some recipes. So it was a place where people could come and experience what was new with Peacock, but they did not have a grocery around it. So they wanted to make a larger experience called PK Market. So when we started to move into thinking about what typography could represent this larger brand for Peacock, we had to keep in mind, you know, these typefaces of the Peacock brand itself, the Peacock Kitchen. We had a tall condensed, a slab serif. So we looked at typefaces that tried to capture the spirit of the brand itself. And we presented, we wanted to make sure we were covering all of our bases. We knew that the client wanted it to be a Western-inspired grocery. So you can see that here on the right. But we also explored some more traditional Korean options as well, just to make sure that that is indeed what they wanted. And without a doubt, they wanted to go with the one on the right. But to look at typefaces that felt a little more similar to Peacock Kitchen. So we ended up with Marcellus, which we show here, and making modifications to it to fit the client needs. So you can notice here all of the E's. They're either striked out or circled. It was very important that the E in the logo type did not feel too much like the parent brand eMart. It felt close, but different enough. And then all of these other markups are our internal team looking at kerning, letter spacing, alignment to make sure that the typeface evolved into what looked like a logo type itself.
Mm-hmm. And here's the final product. So it's set against this verdant green wall, really reinforces that idea of being a fresh market, a place people come to purchase and consume food. And it's been adapted into smaller scale applications too. So on the left is an apron application. You can see that that logo type got translated into this more vertical oriented logo. And then on the right, you can see that same logo is adapted for all the product and packaging purposes in the market as well.
Yeah. And so from there, we needed to create a larger visual system in a type family. Again, that we wanted it to feel like it holds together really well, but that we have enough variety to make it all the way around the store. So we went with the SAW series, which has lots of variety in styles. There's the tall, kind of very condensed, something that is condensed but not as tall, something that's really wide. We also added Marcellus Sans to pair well with the logo type of Marcellus Slab. And then letter Gothic for all of the copy in the space, monospace inspired by kind of like the typography on a receipt. And so you can see how that makes its way into the space itself, some wayfinding down the hall, directing people to the entry, the packaging or the grocery bag itself. This is a seating area within the street food side of the store. And you can see the typography used in a much more playful way. here, and then that same typeface used in the fish market. So you can see the difference there and how it's utilized to feel much more industrial for the inspiration behind the fish market design itself, which is a wet market. And then this is the street food side of the store. And so you can see how eclectic the typography is here. One of the things we had to make sure was that our kind of Western typefaces were flexible enough to fit in a slew of other typefaces so that, you know, it could feel like street food, like a street market itself. So we were lucky enough to have our Korean counterparts typeset all of these for us, and then we were just responsible for kind of designing the signs.
All right, so we've reached our last typographic exploration. We're cooking from scratch in this one. So this is custom type that we did for the Adobe Seattle Cafe in Seattle. And just some context for the project, it's located in Fremont, and it's actually right in between two large bridges that kind of span between Fremont and Queen Anne in Seattle. So on the left-hand side of the site is the Fremont Bridge, which is this beautiful, vibrant blue bridge that opens and closes for boats to access into the lake. Which, if you're not familiar, there's a gigantic lake in Seattle called Lake Union, and that's kind of like a space that people go to enjoy their weekends, and just it's a beautiful natural feature in the city. And then on the right of the location for Adobe's offices, there's this gigantic bridge, which is the Aurora Bridge, and it spans Fremont and Queen Anne as well, but it goes across the entire lake, so it's this huge structure. And we would be remiss without including any of the public market features from Seattle. So it's a huge part of our culture. So that became, those three things became kind of the elements that were woven throughout the space and became a defining feature for the typographic system. And so when thinking about the identity, we started to really explore ideas of the typography becoming the main component of this whole system. And so we started thinking about how we could create an identity that was based around that. The ideas of structure from the bridges, the idea of waves from the water that are just outside the office. And so we started sketching and drawing and thinking about how we could do that with a subtle typeface that could accomplish that. And so we took our sketches and brought them digitally to create the typeface. And we started with a existing typeface called Dogma. And we used the counters of that actually and overlapped the letter forms together to create this new type feature, which you can see on the right, which is that overlapping and those forms kind of converge together to create this B. And we built that out into a broader system. And so that became the larger identity for the space, which alludes to the structure of the bridges, alludes to the water, but still has kind of a refined feature to it. So it's, you know, a little bit more elegant when it needs to be, but it can kind of get into the industrial sensibilities of the space when it also needs to apply to that as well. And then for each of the stations, there are 8 stations within the cafe, and it's almost treated like a food hall. So we wanted that to really be a unifying element as well, the type system. And so we expanded on the type system we created for the identity, but we simplified it. We didn't want that to take away, the stations to take away from the overall identity. And so we created this other system, this other type, essentially, for the stations themselves. But we did differentiate using color and pattern, and the pattern actually is pulled directly from the typeface as well. So each of those shapes that you can see are actually either letter forms or pieces of a letter form that we utilized to create a pattern that related to each of the station's identity. So Fire and Steel became more about like flames and this undulating piece, whereas Union, which is more about the lake, became more about like ripples of a wave throughout the space as well. And we also looked at applications. So thinking about how that identity could show up within the space, like a menu system, coasters, signage as well. The space is still under construction, but we're hoping at some point in the near future that we're able to install and think about how all these applications take shape. So that's it for the Adobe Cafe. We've arrived at the Mignardise, which, as Krista mentioned, is a very small bite of dessert. It's a little treat at the end of our talk. So take it away, Krista.
I just love this word so much. It's my new favorite word. So Ryan and I are very inspired by this process of putting together the Typefeast presentation. And so we've been thinking about how to use our food photography and our love of typography to make pairings, basically, and have a project of just really simple pairings for types of food. So this is a picture of homemade kimchi. And you can see we're using the typeface Briar, which has all of these kind of curves and folds that feels like the cabbage itself. And then similarly, this is a turmeric tonic, which is a fermented beverage. So that idea of fermentation and effervescence and these bubbles come through in the typeface chi, right, which is very bubbly, but also kind of has that fat bottom, which feels like the bottle maybe that you bottle the beverage in itself.
Yeah, and I'll just say that Krista made both of those elements we looked at before. I ate these mussels, so that's the difference. But we thought that the typeface Vita really alluded to the sense of the muscles closing and opening and like the curvaceous shape of the muscles. And so the letter forms for the U and the S really felt like they alluded to that sensibility. And so we paired that with this photograph as well. So I think we've reached the end. This is just a quick snip of all of our resources that we utilized for the projects. And so this is the 3 projects we looked at today, as well as the presentation, all the typefaces that we utilized in the creation of this. And we just wanted to give credit where it's due. We wouldn't be anywhere without these pieces. So thank you.
Yeah,
I
thank
think
you.
it's
And a question
time
time?
for questions. Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Go.
Thank you, everyone.